Welcome to Energy Insights, a podcast by Energy Tracker Asia. On today's podcast episode, we spoke with Hemantha Withanage, Chair at Friends of the Earth International, a non-profit organisation. We covered the recent ongoing upheaval in Sri Lanka. Topics included a short history of what happened up until this year, economic mismanagement by government officials, the cause of fuel shortages and who's at fault, the impacts fuel shortages are having on everyday people, and how this will all affect Sri Lanka's net zero goals. It was great to have Hemantha on the podcast, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. So we're here with Hemantha Withanage. Hemantha, thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for hosting me today.
So before we get started on talking more about the ongoing crisis in Sri Lanka revolving around many issues, and would you be able to give us a summary of your background and what you're currently working on and anything else that you think is important?
Currently, I'm the chairperson of the Friends of the Earth International, which is a organization, a grassroots organizations network based in 73 countries. And so we have the main secretariat based in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. But I am the founder of the Center for Environmental Justice in Sri Lanka about 18 years ago. At the moment, I am the senior advisor to the Center for Environmental Justice, which is also a member of many different organizations working on the environmental issues and the bank monitoring, debt monitoring, etc.
Thank you. So given, I wanted to get into some context first. So I think it's a good idea to unpack this multifaceted crisis that's gripping Sri Lanka right now. It's almost like in a sense, like a perfect storm of many issues kind of combining together. Can you give us a brief overview of how Sri Lanka came to find itself in the situation that it's in right now?
Sri Lanka is going through a serious economic crisis and a debt crisis, which most of the people engaged in this sector explain this is the mother of all kind of crisis. And because of this economic and debt crisis, we have a political crisis, and the people who cannot afford the fuel shortage, liquid petroleum gas shortage, and also the electricity cuts, increasing food prices, and destruction of environmental resources, including forest. So they all came to the streets on April 9th and started having a people's power, which had number of results, including ousting the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but then elected a new president, Ranil Wickremesinghe. And the previous cabinets were dismantled, but in general, people in the country, they are not happy with the political system, and they have been demanded that all 225 politicians in the parliament plus the president should leave and let the system change, build the country and elect new people who can rule the country in a better way to bring a better future for the current and future generations. And people have been demanding system change, which I believe motivated many other countries around the world. So there are some successes, but still people are not happy about the achievement even in this people's power.
And you mentioned many kind of interconnected issues there. So you mentioned there was a lot of environmental issues, there's food issues, there's economic mismanagement. Were these issues going on for quite some time before the current upheaval in the country right now?
You know that Sri Lanka has gone through 30-year-old war between the Sinhala-speaking society and the Tamil speaking society, and it was a military action which ended this war in 2009. But around the beginning of 2000, the government was lifted to the middle income country level, and then around 2010-12 period, so we have increased to the upper middle income country level, which allows many of the private creditors to lend money to Sri Lanka on this vulture kind of capital funds all came to Sri Lanka to invest and investing money into various infrastructure projects. We used to get the loans, concessional loans from the Asian Development Bank, World Bank, etc., which is actually 1% to 1.5% interest rates. But these private capital creditors actually, so they have invested in Sri Lanka for 6% to 15% interest rates. So if you look at the debt today, more than 50% debt actually belongs to these private creditors, and there is some amount for the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, EBRD, and others. AIIB, which is Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, also started investing in Sri Lanka, and especially after 2008, Chinese Belt Road Initiative started building the Colombo port city in Sri Lanka, which seems to be the financial hub of the Belt Road Initiative. This also allowed many Chinese private creditors to invest in Sri Lanka. And all of these actually by 2016, 2017, in those years, these private creditors' involvement in Sri Lanka has been increased a lot. And suddenly we saw by 2020 September, Sri Lanka already surpassed the debt sustainability level, which was the beginning of the current regime. So, which means that actually debt unsustainability issues has already arose around the previous regime and other regimes. So therefore, when it comes to the debt crisis, I'm not going to blame the current regime or the previous regime or the previous president, but all the politicians ruled the country for last 2 decades are responsible. I say 2 decades because around 1996, Sri Lanka was somewhat sovereign, and also we have at least we have produced our own rice around 96, 97, 98 period, but we have lost that. And actually to some extent I blame the country. In 1977 Sri Lanka introduced the open economic system, and then the whole neoliberal policies started adopting in Sri Lanka, which allows many countries, including China, India, and all of them, to dump a lot of goods from these countries, and because of that, our production has gone down. And by 2020, especially when the COVID affecting the country, we suddenly saw that tourism stopped. So therefore, all the dollars came through the tourism industry has significantly dropped, and the second the revenue for Sri Lanka was sending the women and men to Middle Eastern countries as a migratory workers, and they also had difficulties. They were not able to send money to Sri Lanka, so therefore that income also dropped, and also the production also dropped because of the lockdowns, etc. And all these main 3 reasons actually dropped the Sri Lankan economy. There was no adequate dollars to purchase things, and that is the issue when it comes to the losing of debt sustainability in the country in mid 2020 or late 2020. So then suddenly we saw everything was going into the crisis, because without dollars we cannot buy liquid petroleum gases, diesel and petrol, all the fuel. We couldn't buy coal and the liquid natural gases and this energy, not having the energy sovereignty in the country has led to many of the crises what we are facing today. On top of that, the government made some initiatives at the very beginning, stopping vehicle importation. They stopped importing farm oil from Malaysia, and then suddenly they stopped purchasing or importing chemical fertilizer, and without telling the truth to the people, they say this importation restrictions for chemical fertilizer is for moving Sri Lanka to organic farming. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Actually, they didn't have money to buy the chemical fertilizer. They lied to the people. They lied to the whole world. And many of my friends have been asking, okay, you have been introducing very good organic agriculture policies, which is not the case actually. So they didn't have money to buy things, and then they started. Then they realized that when the farmers came to the streets, this was, I'm talking about more than 1 year ago. So when the farmers came to the streets demanding chemical fertilizer, they found that the organic fertilizer which we produce in the country using municipal waste cannot meet that demand, and therefore they started importing nano nitrogen from India, and the municipal solid waste converted into so-called nitrogen organic fertilizer came from China. And when we found there's certain bacteria, very dangerous bacteria like Erwinia bacteria, then the agriculturists started demanding not to import these ones, and the Center for Environmental Justice, which is my organization, we filed the legal action against this shipment, and finally they were not able to unload this shipment, and the ship was traveling around Sri Lanka for almost 2 months and finally went back, but the government had to pay for delay fees, 6.7 million US dollars to the Chinese company. So these kind of measures were taken, but unfortunately these measures again many ad hoc problems. So and finally every action they have taken thinking that they will resolve the issues actually took us to a more deeper into the disaster.
So if we go back to fuel, for example, I mean, there was, as you mentioned, there was a lot of debt taken on by Sri Lanka, and that would have contributed to a lot of the inabilities to pay that or service that debt. And if we look back in, I guess, June or July, I think it was, there was a massive fuel crisis because Sri Lanka couldn't actually buy any fuel. They couldn't actually import anything. What actually happened in the past few months? What did the inability to buy fuel? What did that create in terms of mood on the streets and actions?
Actually, when the government didn't have enough dollars to pay for these shipments, energy, the liquid natural gas, liquid petroleum gas, LPG, and coal, diesel, and petrol. So they were not able to pay for the shipments, and therefore all the providers, so they refused to unload these shipments, and therefore initially more than 1 year ago government changed the formula of the LPG gas, which is the cooking gas, and initially 80% to 20% propane and butane, but then they changed it to 50-50, which started explosions of the gas cookers, which killed many number of people. I think more than 30 cases around, and also more than 700 incidents during that time. So that was the beginning of this energy crisis actually. But lately, they were not able to bring the LPG gas. So the LPG gas queues started in the country, and the people have waited for weeks, keeping their cylinders in front of the LPG station. So that is the beginning. Then they started having power cuts because that time more energy actually generated from the fossil fuel because the water level in the reservoirs were not good enough. But initially some 12 hours power cuts, but then the situation got better when the monsoon rains brought adequate water to the reservoirs. Even right now, I think more energy, even today's situation. Our peak demand is like 2,047 megawatts for today. But out of that, about 1,437 megawatts we generate from renewable sources, including mega hydro. But only today, 609 megawatts we generate from fossil fuel. But this was not the situation few months back before the rain comes. So therefore, that time they were not afford to buy coal and the liquid natural gas, and also there was no diesel. Some of the generators run by diesel power plants, so that time they had more power cuts. But right now, so we are less experiencing less power cuts these days, like 1 hour, 2 hours maximum, like that. But the bigger issue was actually when the government was not able to pay for the shipments of diesel and petrol. That created long queues in front of all the petrol stations, and actually that really hit the people all the time. So therefore, that was the time actually people decided to come to the streets demanding that government should pay for some government should provide them adequate diesel and petrol, and the starting last week government has introduced sort of a QR system, and according to the QR system there's a bit quota for everyone. So there's a little bit improvement right now starting last week, but this doesn't mean that the government doesn't have money to buy next diesel and petrol for the next 1 year. That's the announcement. And because there's no money available, even though we have the QR system, and some of the diesel and petrol comes through the Indian credit line from India through the IOC. So now the situation is little better, but I don't think it's going to maintain more than a few weeks. So therefore, even right now, we have the queues for petrol and diesel across the country. LPG situation little bit better because the litro gas somehow they manage to get support from the World Bank, and then the company, the litro gas company, they themselves started selling gas cylinders, which is something like 80,000 cylinders per day. I think they are meeting almost right now. But again, when this loan is over, so we don't know what is going to happen.
And how do you view? I mean, a lot of the fossil fuel that comes into Sri Lanka that helps the country move is obviously imported. How do you view this kind of system of imported fuels? Do you think that this is sustainable in the long term, or do you think that something needs to change, or there needs to be some sort of reforms around where the energy is supplied from and who from?
Very good question. I think as a scientist, I have the science background, and also I'm an environmental activist for more than 3 decades. Now, since 90s, we have been pushing for at least two things. One is about the agriculture sustainability, sovereignty, food sovereignty, and also energy sovereignty. These we have been pushing at that time, that Sri Lanka should depend and develop more and more local energy sources, which includes, of course, solar power, wind power, and we have a lot of potential for wave power, although it has not the government has not invested in this subject. I think across the world, the technology has some weaknesses, but Sri Lanka has a lot of potential for this one. So therefore, we say don't push for coal power. Unfortunately, the Ceylon Electricity Board engineers who are more addicted to diesel and coal, so they continue to demand having Chinese coal power plant, Indian coal power plant built in Sri Lanka, and even the Asian Development Bank at one point. So they done a study, and in this one also they supported LNG instead of, which is another fossil fuel, LNG instead of promoting renewables. So I think it is a bad policies really led the country not to have the energy sustainability, because Sri Lanka as an island nation, we don't have oil and but we have sun, because we are in it's a tropical country, and almost every 365 days we have the sunlight and wind power, and all of them. But unfortunately, these engineers who were trained to support with fossil fuel, so they did not give the justice to this issue. In this case, actually, I would blame the government for not having adequate capacity of renewable energy, but definitely at least the former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, his election manifesto, Vistas of Prosperity, so they have agreed that Sri Lanka will increase its renewable energy percentage to 70% by 2030, which is also again respecting to our obligation to the nationally determined contribution and to the Paris Declaration. But unfortunately, because the energy engineers did not support this idea, so we have to go through this energy crisis right now. So I think this is world can learn a lot from this experience, because countries definitely, according to the energy budgets we have now, by 2030 all the OECD countries need to go for zero fossil fuel, and all of us, including my small country, we all have to go for fossil fuel zero by 2050. But many of the countries are not going in this path, so therefore the climate change is happening, and Sri Lanka will be obvious a victim of climate change, because we are surrounded by the water, the ocean. So therefore, I think the countries like Sri Lanka should have think about energy sovereignty much earlier than now.
Do you think that, given the current, I guess what you would call a debt crisis in terms of where Sri Lanka is now, do you still think that those net zero targets are attainable for Sri Lanka as a country, or do you think that it will take a bit more time and probably more sort of a bumpy ride to get there?
Unfortunately, yes. That's the biggest problem. Now we are having the problem with energy crisis, and although we have agreed to achieve the although it's going to be voluntary, but sustainable development goals by 2030 and energy achievements by 2030 through the NDC. None of these are going to be realized in Sri Lanka because of the current crisis. It will delay a lot. And right now, the current president is going to put and he said that he's going to put a work plan to become a developed country by 2048. But these are just papers. Nobody has seen the policies or the proposals. But I think what they are thinking as a developed country is a present day traditional developed countries. By 2048, actually, it will not be a developed country. Those developed countries will have much more problems because of the climate change, biodiversity crisis, air pollution, and all these issues. I think that 2048, if we going to call a developed country, that developed country will be very, very different to the developed countries in this decade. So definitely we need to understand that. But I think there's no such discussion happening in Sri Lanka. These are politicians putting with their supporting few supporting academics probably. But I think if we want to put a 2048 plan, which is next 25-year plan, it need to be a people's plan. It need to be discussed with the civil society and the local communities, local people, and thinking about the issues we are going to face by next 3 decades, next 4 decades. I think not having such a plan, so we will be bringing much more disasters into this island
And
nation.
what kind of role do you see the leadership right now? Because it has changed since the recent fuel crisis started. What kind of role can you see this leadership playing in terms of how they engage, as you mentioned, civil society in kind of determining where the country goes from now?
Actually, they are not engaging with the civil society. They are not engaging with the people right now. It is the same set of politicians. They have changed their cabinet minister positions. It's the same set of people. It's the same set of advisors they are putting. And for example, now they have appointed few climate advisors to the president, and the climate advisor is a politician. He doesn't have any clue about what is climate change. Even some of the ministries who spoke to me, is the sports ministry is going to have a climate panel, at climate advisory committee, and they are inviting me to come. Then I asked, who is the minister? Actually, the minister is one of the most corrupt and who has done a lot of environmental disasters during the last 2.5 years. Now he is the minister. Now, people who created this kind of problem, people who thought nature is for making money for the politicians and for the rich people, cannot resolve this problem. So because their mindset is actually not allowing to think differently in this kind of situation. So I don't expect big change going to happen, but this is going to be part of my role. This is going to be part of the role of the civil society, because the civil society has much more understanding about the humanitarian crisis at the moment, food crisis at the moment, and the energy crisis at the moment, death crisis at the moment, illegitimate death issues at the moment. So I think we have to bring these kind of ideologies which we have learned by working with various civil society organizations across the world last 3-4 decades, and we are the people to bring that change. Actually, I don't expect that current politicians do have any kind of the different thinking to resolve this issue. And unfortunately, the whole country, majority people think that going to the IMF is the solution. Majority politicians say things going to the IMF, International Monetary Fund, is the solution. But I would say our solution is not with the International Monetary Fund, because what International Monetary Fund is going to do, they are going to bail out all these private creditors, and again that loan, that money will add to our debt. So which is not going to bring. I think if we think in the energy sustainability, food sustainability, and in general the sustainability of the country, I think that's the pathway we have to go. I think otherwise we would not have learned anything, because without thinking about sustainability or the energy sovereignty and food sovereignty, etc., I don't think so. We are going to face out this issue, because if you learn from Zimbabwe, if you learn from Argentina or Greece, we have a lot to learn. Those countries go to the IMF, but still are, even after a decade, their solutions are not their issues are not resolved. So I think so we have to learn from those and bring that kind of dialogue in within the society, because the people, I won't blame people, because the people don't have much exposure to the international discussions about these ones. I think it is the job of the civil society, academics in the country, or maybe the business people in the country, to educate the politician, educate the people, to push the for the solutions we need for this country.
Do you think that the current ruling party in the government, in your view, do you think that they would be willing to initiate this dialogue and they would be open to change right now, or do you think that it might stall?
Unfortunately, not. I don't say that government is open to this discussion, because at the moment they have arresting people in the struggle. They have arresting some civil society. There are several human right violations continuing. I think it is the past practice. Actually, it is this. They are going through the same kind of approaches, and actually, instead of arresting them, they should have created a platform to understand what system change people have been talking, where that system change can happen, how do we reduce or completely eradicate corruption in the country, how do we improve the access to information, how do we improve the law legal enforcement. So these kind of discussion need to happen. Unfortunately, it is not happening right now. It is not happening in the parliament. It is not happening in the society. It's not even happening in the media level. So therefore, I think these isolated ideologies about how we want to build a more sovereign nation, more sustainable country, I think that yet to happen in Sri Lanka.
So, being mindful of the time, Hemantha, I just want to thank you for coming on today's Energy Insights episode. And before we sign off, is there anywhere that you would like to point listeners to either follow your work or your organization's work or on social media, or is there a website that they can go to?
Definitely. So we really want to do that. I think in this moment we really need people's to people support, because last few months I have traveled to number of other countries, and I realized that the people are really want to have their people have sympathy with the people of Sri Lanka more than the governments in those countries. I think the people in those countries can help to rebuild this nation, because I think Sri Lanka was one of the best tourist destination, and some of the Sri Lankan products are worldwide. And I have seen Sri Lankan tea and the Ceylon tea, Ceylon spices. So these are worldwide, and I think we can still build the name. I think people to people's love can bring much more prosperity to my small island nation, much more than begging governments, begging IMF, or begging private creditors who has predatory interest rates and all. So that's not going to be the solution for my country. I want to ask people around the world to support my country, think about the people in this small nation, and that is where actually, so you can build a much more sovereign, much more sustainable Sri Lanka in the future.
And where could they follow that work from people that are outside Sri Lanka? Where would you recommend that they go follow on social media or visit any websites?
I think the best is so through the social media. Right now, actually, there's no local discussion happening much, but definitely in the coming months, we are going to put some articles and media in the social media about what our solutions are going to be, what debt cancellation means to us, what illegitimate debt cancellation means to us, and how can they support the local communities. Actually, some of the civil society organizations have already initiated some humanitarian support to support 9 million people in the country. Out of 22 million in Sri Lanka, already 9 to 10 million people are suffering from food crisis. So I think so the people have already started. I think so. if you are vigilant, definitely you will find some ways how can you help the people of Sri Lanka. Definitely, I would say social media is the best in this case.
Thank you very much, Hemantha. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me today.
If you found this Energy Insights episode valuable, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel, share it with your network, and follow us on social media. For all our latest articles, head to energytracker.asia for more. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time on Energy Insights.